It was the darkest time of my life. It honestly felt like I was in this like deep, dark pit all by myself, and I have no connection to anything. It was so bizarre. It felt like detachment from myself and feeling like I was living in third person. It was like there was me doing the living, but I was like observing myself doing all of these things. And it felt like I was actually the observer. And it was terrifying.
Hey everyone, I'm Shaun O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Christianna Woodling from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Christianna is 29 years old. Her first bout of depersonalization derealization disorder happened when she was 18, when she was a senior in high school, and the second was from July 2024 until early January 2025. Her symptoms included feeling detached from her body like she was living in the third person. Time felt like it was extremely slow or extremely fast, and terrifying existential thoughts. It was a very difficult experience, but fortunately, Christianna has since made a complete recovery. And as she wrote to me in a recent email, quote, "Hey Shaun, we had a coaching session back in September, and I'm so happy to let you know that I've since made a full recovery. Your guidance made such a difference. In a state that feels so isolated and lonely, I believe it is connection with others experiencing the same thing that has played the biggest role in my recovery. I'd love to share my story. I hope it could encourage others who are going through it." End quote. And Christianna is with us today to talk about her experience with and recovery from depersonalization derealization disorder. Christianna, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's great to have you on the channel and great to speak to you again. Christianna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So like I said, I'm 29. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm a second grade teacher. I've been teaching, this is my 7th year teaching. I love animals. You will probably see some of my pets popping in and out of the background. And I really love to travel. My partner and I, we love, he's from Spain, so we travel to Europe quite frequently, sometimes in South America. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Nice, that's great. So second grade, what age kids are those?
7 and 8-year-olds. It's the best age though, because they're a little more independent, but they're still like young enough that they aren't sassy yet. They still love school and believe in Santa. So it's they're a
Yes,
lot of
yes,
fun.
absolutely. That's great. And how many cats do you have? Is it cats and dogs?
We have cats, dogs, rabbits, and a bird. So we have
Wow.
4 cats.
Well, that's a veritable Noah's Ark. That's fantastic.
Yes.
So Christiana, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so DPDR didn't really become like a disorder for me until I was 18 and in high school, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the feeling of derealization has been a part of my life since I was a little kid. In a nutshell, with some childhood trauma, my brain just kind of learned to adapt to anxiety and fear by detaching. So I've always had feelings of derealization, but it was never scary to me. It just felt like a normal part of anxiety, very transient in and out. Um, but then it wasn't until I was a senior in high school and I had a really bad panic attack kind of out of nowhere. I was actually at musical theater rehearsal and having a great time, and it just hit me. And it was quite terrifying. Um, and after, that, my body just kind of stayed in this like heightened um, anxiety state, and I developed this fear of having another panic attack. And that's when like I noticed I was starting to feel really strange. Like the derealization was really sticking, and it was really scaring. And I found myself um really struggling to get grounded again. And it just kind of spiraled through there. And I just remember in high school, and it was so scary because, this was 10 plus years ago before. I mean, DPDR isn't super talked about today, but I feel like it's a little bit more talked about than it was 10 years ago. So during that time, I had no idea what was happening. I thought maybe this was a brain tumor, maybe I'm going insane. My family didn't know how to help me. Um, Luckily, I had like some amazing teachers in high school and our guidance counselor who kind of helped me make it through the last few months of senior year. Um, Unfortunately, I missed a lot of really fun things senior year. I was really just trying to survive the day at school. And um, then summer came and kind of all of this pressure just kind of went away because it was like, okay, I can, do what I'm comfortable with. And I kind of put myself into a routine. And little by little, like I started to forget about all of the symptoms that I had been feeling for the past few months. And I didn't even realize that I had completely gone away until, I realized I wasn't thinking about it anymore. So then it just kind of, that was it. I've been fine the last, 10 years and up until last summer. At the end of the school year last year, teaching can be a little stressful. So I was definitely feeling some like increased stress, increased anxiety. Um, I was on like a SSRI for many years to help with just regular anxiety, and I had made the decision to like wean off of it. Um, and so that kind of the withdrawal symptoms were playing into a part of that. But the most recent bout happened last summer. My partner and we went on a European trip. We went to Spain for a few days. Um, then we went to the Netherlands, spent some time in Delft and Amsterdam. And our trip there was incredibly long. We ended up leaving in the early afternoon. We drove 4.5 hours to the Pittsburgh airport, and then we waited there, and then we took a flight. We ended up having like a 4 hour layover in Iceland, and then it was like a 24-hour trip, all said and done. So we ended up landing in Iceland. It was like maybe like 3 a.m. our time. And it was very bright. Like there was sun, and I was not expecting that. And I've always been sensitive to light. So like there was no sleep. It was just straight like sun the whole time. It never felt like night. My body was very confused. And I ended up having like a really bad panic attack in the airport in Reykjavik. Um, and it was terrifying. And I just kept thinking like, oh my gosh, like I still have 20 more hours that I have to survive this until I can finally rest. And that kind of triggered this heightened sense of anxiety. And I started to feel derealization set in. And it was sticking. It was sticking again like it had 10 years ago. And it's been a really long time since I had experienced that. So my brain was kind of like, what is going on? Like, am I going crazy? And of course, we were in Europe and traveling, so there was like the time change difference. I was exhausted. I was in like a new place, so there was no sense of feeling grounded for me. And this was a long trip. It was like 15 days. And just every day that I was there, the symptoms were getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I found myself kind of trapped in this kind of obsessive cycle of thoughts. Um, and then the derealization was pretty constant. I felt very dreamy, almost like cartoon-like outside. And then, that was really scary. So then I started to feel myself like detach from myself at the same time. And I noticed like mirrors were really starting to freak me out while I was there. I was having a hard time being able to do my makeup and hair. So I started, avoiding them. And then, we were on our last day there in Amsterdam. I was trying to make the best of it. We ended up going on like a hour long kind of boat tour through Amsterdam. And I just had like the worst panic attack there. I was feeling trapped on the boat and I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm dreaming, nothing feels real, time is feeling very strange. And I was panicking and we were trapped on the boat, so that wasn't helping. But I made it through that. And then our trip home was awful. It was, like 10 hours of just reoccurring panic attacks because I was trapped on a flight and, everything felt dreamy. I didn't feel real. Everything was off, you know. And then I was stuck with all of those symptoms for months. I was really hoping that when I came back, it would just magically go away. But it didn't. My body was still kind of stuck in this heightened anxiety state, and school was right around the corner, and um, I couldn't function at that point. Even just like taking a shower was triggering panic attacks or brushing my teeth. I couldn't look in mirrors, couldn't go to the grocery store, and I just kind of became completely like housebound and contained within the walls. And I ended up having to do like leave at the beginning of the school year. I missed, the first month and a half of school because I couldn't function. And yeah, but um, made it through eventually, and here we are. I don't know if you had any specific questions, but that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for going through that with us, Christianna. Um, it's a common thing, more common than most people imagine, to go through the experience when you're younger as a teenager and for it to then fade away and then come back at a later date. And it often, one of the reasons that happens is because as teenagers, our attention span is shorter, we're more easily distracted. And then as we get older, we become more aware of our internal processes and our mental health. And it can become more difficult to just focus away and onto a different habit of thinking. Um, but when it happened to you the first time, Christiana, did you find the term depersonalization at that point, or what was it like? So when you were speaking to your teachers and
Mhm.
school counselors, I believe mentioned, but like, was there how was it being framed back then?
Yeah, so it was being framed, as just anxiety, which, as we know, it is essentially anxiety, but it always felt different. Like I'm like, I felt anxiety before. This feels different. And, no one ever said anything that really quite matched what I was feeling. So there was always like this apprehension, like, no, there's something else. I don't know what it is. I do remember like Googling at one point, like feeling dreamy, like, and it's scary. And I saw like the word depersonalization. But there really wasn't many, articles or anything that I found. Like, I feel like it was maybe just like a dictionary definition or maybe like one website, but there was not a whole lot of information about like what causes it, what does it feel like, how common is this? It was just like, okay, I know there's a word for it, but I don't know how to get rid of it. And, you know, I think eventually I kind of figured out by trial and error, like how to get rid of it, but I never fully understood it. Which I think is why it came back at a later point because I never really like closed the chapter. We just kind of moved past it.
That's a very good way of describing it. Um, we we can often find that we reduce the symptoms simply by focusing away from them and um, giving our brains the space to let it go, which feels counterintuitive at first because the symptoms feel so frightening. But when we do that, our brain just categorizes them as not being important and lets them go. But unless you have a full explanation for what this is, then that just kind of feels like a temporary reprieve. So,
Mhm.
I mean, when I was going through DP, I felt that, even if I could recover, I didn't think I could, but even if I could somehow get rid of the symptoms, what's to stop this coming back in 5 years' time if I have another panic attack, you know? Um, Interesting as well that you had that panic attack in Amsterdam as well, Christiana, because a lot of people, myself included, have panic attacks in Amsterdam, but it's but it's not because of the boat.
No.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was a bit ironic, I have to say. And I do intend to go back and actually enjoy Amsterdam.
Mm.
That's on my goal list.
Well, interestingly, I've been back to Amsterdam twice since I had my experience back in 2005, and the last time was sometime last year. Um, and I stayed there for a couple of days and had a great time. And I did one of those boat tours actually. I did one of the hour-long boat tours, and I had a
Yeah.
great time.
I'm
Yeah,
sure it's really lovely.
yeah. It is. It is. You know, it's funny. We develop these associations with specific kind of geographical spots or situations, but it's not because of the place itself. It's because of the association, and the association is happening because of anxiety. Airports as well can be particularly difficult, as you mentioned, like, you know, having a panic attack in Reykjavik airports. Um, because airports are, I mean, they're stressful anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and there's bright lights, there's movements, there's people everywhere. And you might be under pressure to get through security or get to, you know, you might be, so it's a, you know, they're just kind of naturally quite stressful
Right.
places. So if you're feeling a bit on edge, like, or a bit nervous, that's often when it can, you know, something can happen to kind of push you into panic attack territory. Um, so and also just out of curiosity, Christian, so you mentioned you said your family weren't didn't know how to help you, and
Mhm.
I had a very similar experience because I mean my parents were great, and they were they were like, look, what do we need to do to fix you, to make this right, like, you know. um but I didn't have the answers for them. And then when I went to speak to doctors, and they said it's anxiety,
Mhm.
but I didn't believe it was anxiety. So we were kind of in this a bit of a limbo state of like, well, like, so I was living at home, I couldn't work, I couldn't do anything, but we also didn't really know how to proceed with this. So we
Mhm.
were trying, I was trying like yoga and Reiki and different kind of techniques. And my family were always okay. Hey, we'll try this. We'll try this. We'll try this. Um, but it was a frustrating place to be because you don't know what direction to even point yourself in to start it. You know.
Yeah, that's very similar to my experience. And, I feel bad for my family at times because they're so loving and, they hate seeing their child suffer, but nobody knew how to help. So I'm hoping eventually, DPDR is much more talked about and, hopefully other people have a different experience.
Certainly. So your first experience with us, Chris, would have been, 20 is it 2014 maybe, or thereabouts, 15,
2014. Yep.
2014. So my experience, my experience with it was in 2005. And at that time there was one forum. There was
2014.
no social media. YouTube didn't exist. I still don't think it existed. There certainly wasn't any information about DPDR on there anyways. It was just South Park episodes and stuff like this. It was just like dipped into into like a couple of minutes, you know. God be with the days. But it's interesting that, like, at that time you could, because we can almost see this in 10-year increments. So
Yeah.
like, so I had mine in 2005, and there was like almost no information apart from one forum. Then cut to 10 years later, and there's a bit more information, so you're able to kind of to Google this and to find, you know, maybe
Yeah.
bits and pieces here and there. And then cut to another 10 years later, and it is way more talked about. It's not, you're absolutely right. It's not at the place where it needs to be. It's not at a place where everyone could walk into their doctor and the doctor goes, oh, that's what that is. But it is moving. It is, the awareness of it is absolutely growing. Maybe more slowly than we'd like, but it is growing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now you can find people talking about it on TikTok and Instagram, and it's, and it's so much easier to connect with other people who are going through it. So it's definitely getting there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So just getting back to your own experience, Christiana. So when it came back in July 2024, what was it like kind of starting to live with it? Because I remember for me when I got to a point where I was a couple of months into it and I started to think to myself, like, this mightn't be going away. Like, what do I do? Like, I mean, I don't think I can ever travel again. I don't think I can,
Yeah.
and I'm not even sure I can work. So what was that period like for you?
Oh, it was like the darkest time of my life ever. Like I feel even more so than the first bout that I experienced because it was like I knew how awful that was, and it's like now it's back and it feels worse and it's more disruptive to my life than it was
Mm.
10 years ago. And it honestly felt like I was in this like deep dark pit all by myself. Not that I could even identify with myself at the time. It was like I just feel like I'm this ball of life and I have no connection to anything. And it was just absolutely terrifying and, depressing. And it was like, what if it doesn't go away this time? What if I'm stuck like this forever and I'm never gonna be able to go back to teaching which I love or travel? And it just, just darkness, everything bad.
Yeah, yeah. And were you are you taking time off from work at that point?
Yes. Yes. This was like probably it would have been like 2, 3 months after it kind of started. And, I had missed a month of school and I'm just like, this isn't getting better. Like, I'm supposed to go back to work in a month. How am I going to do that? How am I ever going to get back to normal? Because I, I found myself waking up every day like, is it still there? Oh, yeah, it's still here. Okay. Maybe it'll be gone tomorrow. And it wasn't working like that.
That's absolutely the pattern we get into, isn't it? We think just like fingers crossed I wake up tomorrow and it's gone. Please, 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 And then you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is you check to see is it gone. And unfortunately it's the checking that keeps it going. Yeah, you mentioned a few of them, Christiana, but could you go into a bit more detail about the symptoms you were experiencing across this time?
Yeah. I'm going to say probably my least favorite symptom that stuck around the longest, of course, was the depersonalization in itself, was this detachment from myself and feeling like I was living in third person. It was so bizarre. It felt like there was me doing the living, but I was like observing myself doing all of these things. And it felt like I was actually the observer. And it was terrifying because as someone prior who typically feels so connected and in tune with myself, it was that was definitely like the most scary part of it for me. It was often like I would be thinking things like, oh, like I'm hungry. And it would be like, well, who's hungry? Like, who is that talking in my brain? I know it's me, but why doesn't it feel like me? And I was terrified of mirrors. So at one point I had like covered all of our mirrors with, inspiring quotes. Um, so that was definitely the worst part. But in addition to that, I was also experiencing, the derealization with, everything felt dreamy. But that was more of like a scale. At times, things felt more dreamy than at other times. I found myself really afraid of the sun, like the sunlight. So if it was sunny outside, I felt more intense derealization. If it was cloudy and rainy, there was a little bit more sense of feeling grounded. But also everything just felt overwhelming. Like I remember at one point sitting on the couch looking outside at the trees and thinking, oh my gosh, those trees are so overwhelming. Like, how are they trees? Like, how are those things there? And then I was like, why am I having these thoughts? Like, this sounds absolutely crazy. Um, and things just looked cartoonish. And then, time felt weird. Like at times it was like really fast. Like it would be like, whoa, like how did I even get here? But then other times it was like, it felt like a whole, hour had passed in like the span of 1 minute. Yeah. And then just also developing weird phobias to different things like the sun, for example, like sunny days. It was like, oh no, I can't go outside if it's sunny. And um, feeling trapped in places like I wouldn't go anywhere if I wasn't driving because I was afraid of being trapped there. Or um, yeah, looking in mirrors, like I became afraid of mirrors. If there were any out, I would avoid them. Um, yeah, and then of course the existential thoughts were plaguing me at all times as well because I was just constantly questioning like, am I real? Is this real? Is this actually happening? Like, is this some kind of weird dream that I'm gonna wake up from? Like, and then at one point I thought, well, maybe I'm having a spiritual awakening. And then it was like, no, I don't think this is a spiritual awakening. It shouldn't feel like this. So it just kind of went through all of the textbook uh, things that, as crazy as you feel like it sounds, then you realize other people are having equally as crazy experiences. And you're like, okay, this really isn't that weird in the sense of all people with DPDR.
Certainly. Yeah, I went through the list of things, including spiritual awakening. I thought I was being punished by the universe. I thought I had ego death. I thought I'd actually died at one point. I thought I was in limbo. I thought I was in purgatory. I thought you name it, you name it. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying at the time because you're having these thoughts and you're thinking to yourself, like, this doesn't make sense. But
Mhm.
when you don't have a better explanation and the scale of what you're going through feels like it's a punishment or it feels like it is at the scale of a spiritual awakening,
Mhm.
then we take those explanations and put them onto it. But um, fortunately, those narratives don't have anything to do with it. And it is that it feels terrifying. But a panic attack feels terrifying. When you're going through a panic attack, the scale of it feels it feels like the worst thing that has ever happened to anybody, and it's happening to you now. That's what it feels like.
Mhm.
But that perceived scale is not actually correct. It's uh it is the nature of anxiety to feel like it is that large, but in actuality it's not. Not only is it not that, but you're completely safe. You're
Mhm.
completely safe, and it'll pass. But when that happens persistently, then we start to put these big, massive explanations on top of it.
Mhm.
You mentioned that back in the day you would come across the term depersonalization. You Googled it when you were 18, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So when it happens, then um, a decade later or thereabouts, did you think to yourself, well, that's what this is? And also, did you go to any doctors or therapists and bring the term with you?
Yes. So I did recognize it as depersonalization almost immediately.
Mm.
Um, but of course, in, that heightened anxiety, you're not quite thinking as logically as you normally would. So in my mind, it was like, okay, this is depersonalization, but this is different. This is a really bad case of it. This is something really bad. This time it's probably going to turn into psychosis. So like, even though I was able to identify those feelings because I had experienced them before, there was still this sense of like, it has to be different this time. Like, there's no way that, this is the same thing I experienced 10 years ago. So when I, returned from the trip, I was already seeing a therapist weekly just for, normal life things. And I just remember going to see her and just her opening the door and I just started sobbing because we had talked previously about, my experiences in high school. So she knew like what had happened before. And it was actually really cool because she was somewhat familiar with forms of disassociation and she actually like identified it before I said the word depersonalization. Unfortunately, she's not like an expert in DPDR, but she is an incredible therapist and, knows a lot about anxiety. So we kind of focused in on like the anxiety piece. This is a form of anxiety, like, let's do those skills. So it definitely did help in some ways just to have like a professional in the mental health field to kind of guide through and just to vent to. Um, but unfortunately, I feel like at the end of the day, it is very much like a personal experience that only you can come out of. Um, and I did also start seeing a psychiatrist who did like prescribe a different anxiety med, which I do think played a part in the recovery. But as I know from my first experience, I don't think like medication it like will absolutely fix DPDR and that's all you need to do. But it definitely was a tool in the process and lowering my anxiety. But the first time, I got through it without medication. So it is still possible. But they were good tools. So we felt like I had a really good support team, which I recognize is also unique because my psychiatrist was also familiar with DPDR and had treated other people with it.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
yeah. Whereas like when I had initially started with my family doctor, they did not know what I was talking about. So it is starting to trickle, I think, into the professionals in mental health, which is a great thing. So they definitely played, I think, a viable tool in the process of recovery.
That's great. That's great to hear. Yeah, I think in the past, what probably was more likely to happen was somebody develops the condition. What happened with me and with you as well, Christiana, I think, is that like you go to your local doctor and the doctor looks at you and you are clearly displaying the symptoms of anxiety. So I had dropped weight. I was really gaunt. Like I was you know um I was displaying the physical symptoms of anxiety. I had lost sleep, and he kind of got some of the other stuff out of the way. Like he was obviously asking me questions relating to things like psychosis or whatever. Like, and I wasn't displaying those symptoms as anyone with an anxiety based condition isn't. But he just said like, but that's anxiety. What you have is anxiety, and while not technically incorrect, it's not the information that you need. It's not it's not the specificity of information that you need. But I think that today what happens is that like somebody has these symptoms and looks up things like, I feel like I'm in a dream. I feel like I'm not real. I'm scared of looking in the mirrors or whatever. And if you look that up on TikTok or YouTube, like you'll find it. Like
That
you will find it, right? And so I think happens is that people find it and then they go into their doctor and they say, okay, and I have this type of anxiety or I have this symptom of anxiety called DPDR. It's actually quite common. And even if the doctor hasn't heard of it, now they've heard of it, right?
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, and then they may go look it up and they say, oh, there's actually a lot of data about this. It hasn't been researched as much as other anxiety based conditions. Okay, and there's different reasons for that. But just having that kind of increased awareness of it is extremely beneficial because like I'm starting to see more and more people who say younger folks especially who say that like they go into their doctor and they describe what it is and the doctor says, oh, that's called depersonalization. And just hearing that from a medical professional, you go, oh right, okay, thank God.
yeah.
Now that's not going to switch it off immediately, but
Mhm.
it takes away this whole panic thing of like, oh Jesus, what if this is something that no one's ever had
Yeah.
before? What if this is the worst thing ever? And which brings me back to something you said as well, Christiana. You said that like this is a when you said, well, I have it again this time, but this time it's a really bad case of it, right? And and I think that like if there's if there's if one or two things that I could say that I have that are in common with every single one of the tens of thousands of people I've worked with over the last 20 years is that almost everyone says, yeah, but this is really bad, Shaun. And I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, all these other people recovered, but like mine's different. Mine's bad, right? Um, and it's the same thing as essentially as kind of like it's it's the same engine that produces what if this is a spiritual awakening? What if this is an ego death? What if this one is worse than all the other ones? And also it's in the nature of anxiety to do that, right? Because the example I always like to give is nobody ever had a panic attack and said to themselves, this isn't as bad as the one I had 2 weeks ago. This will be grand. Like, that's not a panic attack. A panic attack is like, oh, this is the worst one I've ever had. I'm not going to come
Yep.
out of this one. Um, that's the nature of anxiety. If you're, I would say almost to the degree that like, if you're not thinking about it like that, it's not anxiety. Anxiety is about catastrophizing. It's about jumping to the worst possible conclusion. Um, but it is really wonderful to hear that you were able to get more help than you had and more of an explanation than you did the first time around. Um, you may have mentioned it already, Christiana, because you remember you described being, in that deep dark pit. Is there a particular moment that you remember as being your lowest point in the whole experience, or any particular day or any event?
Um, yeah, I do. I think my lowest point, I remember I was, obviously feeling very anxious and all of the symptoms. And, I went to take a bubble bath because I thought, okay, maybe this will help, ease some anxiety. But I ended up just having a panic attack in the bathtub. And I just remember just feeling so panicked because it was like nothing was easing these symptoms. There was no relief. It was just constant torture 24/7 unless I was sleeping. And I just remember feeling so helpless, like I don't know what to do. And I remember wishing, like, I wish like I would just die. Like I was never suicidal, but I remember having that thought, like I wish something would take me out because this is how horrible this feels.
I'm sorry I went through that, Christiana. Yeah, it is. It's a dark place to be, and I was there too. And things, and something as simple as taking a bubble bath, like, or for me it was like always like watching movies. Like I love movies. I always have. I'm a film geek, like, and there's a couple of films that like are in my bones. Like, I mean, like First Jurassic Park is like I just adore that film top to bottom. And I remember watching it like and just being terrified, like, and not even of the dinosaurs, but just being terrified that like
Yeah.
what the hell is this? In the same way that you were saying about the tree, like what the hell? What is this? Like, I'm looking at the film, going like, I can't, I can't absorb this. Like, forget about enjoying it. Like, I can't even be near this thing. Like, um, realizing that the fundamental things in your life that you grew up with, that in your childhood, like you can't enjoy them anymore, is a very, very scary thing. Um, yeah, like torture. It does feel like that at times. It does feel like that because it just is relentless. And I had a time when I remember when I started having dreams about it, and I would have dreams in which I was panicking and experiencing full on DP and DR, and I would wake up into a panic attack and DPDR, and I just thought like, this is like, now it's 24/7. It is around the clock. How can I live like this? And very, very similar to yourself as well, Christiana. Like, I never, I never, I never felt suicidal. Like, I don't think I ever actually kind of gave serious thought to it. But I do remember having maybe the ideations, and I do remember and I do remember thinking like, I wish I could just turn this off. I
Mhm.
wish I could just could I just like switch this to black
Yeah.
for a while, and not because sleep's not doing it anymore. Movies aren't doing it. Nothing will turn off this chaos, this
Mhm.
roller coaster that's in my brain, and I would just have done anything to turn it off. Um, and that's a very, very scary place to be, and especially when like a couple of months earlier,
Hmm.
life was great. Life was great, and it feels like, like you're, as you said, like travel, um, uh, um, your career, your family, socializing, all that good stuff. And now you've just ran into this wall, and there's no getting past it, and the world is just going on without you. It's a very, very dark place to be. Yeah. So, anyways, with all that in mind, Christiana, how did your recovery start?
Well, I remember the first thing I did was I downloaded the DPA manual, actually in a hotel room in Amsterdam. And because it was very like impulsive. It was like, okay, I need some kind of validation right now because I feel like I'm, going insane. And I remember reading it, the whole thing in the hotel room, and, obviously in that state and, being away from home, I wasn't quite absorbing it. But I would say, that was the start. And, over the next few weeks to a month, I, would read back to it and be like, okay, what am I doing wrong? Like, where am I getting stuck up because I'm not feeling any progress? And I remember, kind of being stuck. And then when I hit rock bottom, it was like, that was when I had scheduled, our coaching session. And that really helped me to see the part that I was getting caught up in. And then for me, I didn't realize this at the time, but, I was kind of like compulsively doing some like reassurance seeking on Google. Like, I would have the symptoms and then I would need to Google them to make sure, okay, this is what it is. It's not something really bad. And it just became this cycle that was keeping it, you know, alive. And you had pointed that out, like stay off Google, stay off Reddit. Like those are not helping. Like we have the validation. And once I stopped that reassurance seeking and just focusing on like the explicit, like, okay, we just need to go on with life. Like it might feel uncomfortable right now, but we're just going to do it because we got to train our body that this is not dangerous. And it didn't happen overnight. I was really hoping it would happen overnight. And I found myself almost like setting like a deadline, like, okay, I have to be recovered by October 21st because I need to go back to work. It doesn't happen like that. And recovery it is not a perfect linear graph like I thought that it was going to be. I would have like a little win and then I would be down for a couple days and be like, oh man, like it's never going away. But then, then I would have another little win. And it was very gradual, very up and down. And then, then I started to have bigger wins. And then there were longer periods of time where I wasn't thinking about it. And that's when I started to realize was really once I got to a place where I was steady, like I wasn't actively having panic attacks, I returned to work, which was actually the best thing that I did for my recovery because sitting at home, even though it might have felt more comfortable at that time, was not was was not helping me progress in recovery. I think there was a part in being home that there was this need to, seek therapy, do therapy twice a week, practice these skills. But once I got to the point where, I could do the minimum I needed to get back to my job, that was where I really saw improvement. And, that first month back to work, it was hard. Like there were days where I was experiencing really, really, really intense symptoms again. It almost felt like I was going backwards. But I realized I wasn't going backwards, but I had just been home by myself, for 4 months. And now there's 24 little people, needing me and talking. And it was very overstimulating, which, my body needed more time to just kind of get used to that. But eventually there were like more good days than bad days. And then eventually it was like mostly good days with maybe one day feeling more anxious than usual. And then time just started going and I was like, oh, that didn't like, I haven't thought about DPDR in a while. Like, I'm doing things without even thinking about how DPDR would affect it because, for a while it was like, I would be asked to go out like to dinner or something, and it would be like, I don't know if I can do that because I know my DPDR is going to be really bad in that restaurant. And then eventually I would go to the restaurant, but I would have to plan like, what's my escape route? Where do I go if I start panicking? But which was really funny because when I did go to the restaurant, I never actually needed those things. I I did it and it was uncomfortable, but it was fine. But then the next time I went to the same restaurant, I wasn't even thinking about it being uncomfortable. And then it just, life felt normal again and I was back in it. So it's kind of weird because it's like it's not like you wake up and it's like, "Oh, wow, man, my DPDR is finally gone." It's not like that. Um, and I think it's really important to be kind and patient with yourself. You know, it's good to check in with yourself and make sure that, you are doing things that are helping in your recovery and not getting stuck in certain places. But just be kind to yourself, be patient. Like, it is a really hard thing to overcome and it's terrifying. Um, but, I feel like I had the worst case of it and I got through it. So, like, really, anyone can. Like, you can get through it.
Absolutely. Um, the compulsive symptom reassurance seeking was something I did. I think everyone does at some point because even when you know the symptoms, you know the laundry list of DPDR symptoms. What'll happen is you'll get maybe this symptom and this symptom at the same time that you haven't experienced before, and then you go, "Oh my god, what does
Mhm.
this mean?" So straight onto Reddit, straight onto Google, onto some of the forums, and you need to find that explanation for what I need to find somebody who has had this exact set of symptoms. And until I find that, I can't be sure that I don't have a different version of DP and DR. And we did this with
Exactly.
best of intentions. Yeah, good.
No, you mentioned Reddit and I remember seeing people like, "Oh, I've been suffering from DPDR for 20 years." And when you're in it and you're reading that and you're like, "Oh my God, like it's only been a couple months. I can't do this for 20 years." But then, when you take a step back and you're like, "Well, but this person is posting about it on Reddit." Like, people who've recovered, they're not posting about it on Reddit. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it seems like such a scary thing to see that, someone has had it for 20 years. But then you also see people who've had it for 10 years. You'll see people who've had it for 2 years, 1 year. You'll see people who've had it for 2 weeks and they recovered, right? And what this that feels like initially is that, well, there must be different types of the condition that last for different amounts of time. And I won't know how long, I won't know which version I've had until I recover from it, but that could be 10 years. I don't know. But in actual fact, all it shows you is that it takes people different amounts of time to find the correct information and do the right things to recover. That's all. That's all. Some people develop depersonalization disorder and they are so busy with work that within a week it's gone.
yeah.
Right? They're just too busy, right? They can't stop working. They don't have time to research it. They don't have time to focus on it. They just get back and they're just like, okay, geez, that was a weird thing, but whatever, I have stuff to do. And then for me, I developed the condition and for almost 2 years, I did all the wrong things. I did them with the best of intentions, but I just researched it all the time. I was obsessing about it, talking about it all the time. And then when I did the correct things to recover, which felt very counterintuitive, but they are the right things to do, as with all anxiety-based conditions, I recovered. So the length of time has no bearing on how long it will take the length of time that it takes somebody else to recover has no bearing on the amount of time it takes you to recover. It's just until you do find the correct information and do the right things. That's all that means. um Thing about getting back to work as well, Christiana. Absolutely. There's a good saying, and that goes like, it's action before mood. Um, Not mood before action. You can't wait until you're 100% ready to go back to work, because you never will be, right? But if you just push yourself and say, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to feel some anxiety, I'm going to feel some DP, but I got to go to work, and you go and you do it. And then all the distractions that happen at work just start to take over a bit, and you start to forget to be so concerned about the anxiety and DP. Um, and again, this is another reason why people end up with the condition for years, is because they say, okay, well, I need to wait until the anxiety is completely gone
Mhm.
before I can go and do A, B, and C. I went back to college. I did a master's degree, and I did not feel like I was prepared to do it when I did it. But when I did it, it showed me that I didn't have to have the anxiety completely gone. And when I did it, and and having consistent focus on other things helped to demonstrate to my brain that the anxiety didn't need to be there. um, and as you said, it just turns into more good days than bad after a while. And then you are at a restaurant one day and you just realize, I haven't thought about it. Or you get to the end of some day at work and you say, I forgot to be anxious today. I just forgot to be anxious, you
Yeah.
know? Mm. And the deadlines thing is interesting as well, because, we tend to do that. We tend to put deadlines on these things and say, I have to be better by Christmas. I have to be better by my birthday or whatever. And we do this with the best of intentions, but all that does is it tells your brain that the anxiety is important enough that it deserves a deadline.
Mhm.
And that's not what it deserves. It doesn't deserve that at all. Um, don't even give it that.
Mhm.
It's like having a deadline on forgetting about a song stuck in your head. You know, you're just tripping yourself up by giving it a deadline. Let the song be there, let that thought be there. Don't put a deadline on it, and then focus your attention away. The forgetting process will happen in the background while you're doing other things, not checking your stopwatch. Um uh Christiana, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
It was like the first piece of, I guess, for me that felt like trustworthy information. Like I knew that it was coming from somebody who knew what they were talking about and that had also successfully recovered. So for me, it felt like, okay, I can trust this piece of literature. And, it was very validating because it was like, okay, um, maybe like people can get DPDR from different, situations, but at the root, it's all the same, like response from the body and the brain. And, just seeing like my symptoms really as wild and weird as they sounded, they're really not unique to me. And then also just having like kind of explicit, like, this is what you need to do to get better was really helpful because, a lot of things you find on the internet or that you hear are, this is what you're experiencing and why, but there's not a lot of okay, but what do I do with this?
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, and how was and did you find the coaching session helpful?
Super helpful. Yes, totally. That was a big turning point for me because up until that point, you were the first person that I ever talked to, like, that knew what I was talking about and had also gone through it themselves because up until then, none of my friends, I didn't know anybody who experienced anything similar. So even just that human connection with somebody else who gets it was a huge turning point.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. It is something that I would have wanted so badly back in the day as well, was just to have a conversation with somebody who had gone through it, and just to go through my symptoms and have them explain each and every one of them to me, tell me what to expect on the road to recovery. Yeah, yes, I'm very, very glad that was helpful, Christiana. So a question that people ask all the time, Christiana. now that you've recovered from depersonalization and derealization, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yeah. Yeah, it you feel like because of how intense and scary it feels, like it must be doing some kind of damage or rewiring to my brain. But it's not. Um, when the anxiety goes away, like you just feel like yourself again. Um, I will say like the only weird part is like the months that I was really, really heavy into the DPDR kind of feel like a blur. Like, I don't really, I can talk about it, but I don't remember a lot of what happened during those months. But yeah, I feel completely like I did before it ever happened. And honestly, like I would never have said this when I was going through it, but it has positively changed me in the way that like that was the hardest thing I've ever overcome and I did it. So like I feel like I am so much stronger than I ever knew, but also like I have learned so much about my brain and my body and how my experiences have shaped the way my brain thinks. And it's like now I can go into situations and um and not everybody will have this experience, but like for me, you know, from a kid, like derealization, like that kind of dreamy feeling has always been a normal anxiety response to me. And like, I don't want people to get freaked out, but like, it was never a problem. It was just like, okay, my brain is overwhelmed right now. We're going to check out for a little bit. And it was very transient. Like it was because it is a normal anxiety response. But we just, when it becomes, more of a disorder, we get stuck on it. So for me, like, I still, in times of anxiety will feel a little dreamy, but it passes. It's nothing like being stuck in a DPDR episode. And now my brain recognizes that and I know how to take care of myself in those moments. Like, okay, my brain, we just need to go off signal for a little bit and then we're gonna be fine.
Absolutely. And also, it's so important to remember that like people experience feelings, brief feelings of DPDR all the time. This is the most common thing in the world. People experience it briefly. Like if you get a plane to Australia and you're jet lagged for a couple of days, you'll probably feel feelings of DPDR, right? Just because you're tired and you're kind of half asleep or whatever. Or these, um, it's estimated that 75%, up to 75% of people will experience at least one episode of DPDR in their lives, right? It is normal. It's part of your body and brain's anxious reaction. Um, it is to experience this from time to time is to be human, but that doesn't mean that it should turn into an ongoing condition. The example I like to
Exactly.
give is take somebody who um has a panic attack, thinks they're having a heart attack,
Hmm.
and then becomes obsessively focused on their heart and their heartbeat, which is a quite a common thing. And I always think like, what happens if like, if I'm driving and I have a heart attack, and what if I'm at work, I have a heart attack, so they're monitoring their heart all the time, right? And then it gets explained to them that, okay, no, that a panic attack doesn't mean you're having a heart attack, like, and you don't need to obsessively focus on your heart. And also part of the reason that your heart is beating so quickly is because you're focusing on it. So if you train yourself away from that, it gets back to normal. Okay, great. But understanding that, putting the label on it, allows them to let it go. But when that person walks out of their therapist's office or the doctor's office with that information, does that mean that they'll never experience um uh um heart palpitations ever again? Like, of course they will. Like they're we're humans. Like you'll experience heart palpitations, you'll experience muscle tension, moments of anxiety, you'll experience brief moments of DPDR, just like everybody does. But it's the focusing on it and obsessing about it that causes it to become an ongoing issue. And that's what we train ourselves away from. And it's, as you put it beautifully, Christian, you said it's getting stuck on it. It's the getting stuck on it and obsessing about it and becoming phobic of it. That's the problem. And that's That's the engine that's behind all anxiety-based conditions. You know, it's like behind claustrophobia, agoraphobia, social anxiety disorder. It's having a thought or a moment of anxiety in a specific space or a specific thought, and then focusing on it and obsessing about it and getting stuck on it. That's what, and then putting these big narratives on it, like maybe I'm dying, maybe I'm going crazy or
Yeah.
whatever. And then recovery is like, no, take all these narratives off it, look at it for what it is. I was just stuck on this thought, and I'm going to unstick myself from this thought and let it go. That's all.
I think what's so hard, I love the analogy about, the heart palpitations because I've seen that with people. And I think what makes DPDR especially tricky is that symptom is not like physical. Like, you can go to a doctor and have the doctor check out your heart and, do all the tests and be like, nope, your heart is perfectly healthy. But I think, with like the feelings of DPDR, it's so tricky because it's happening in your brain and no one can really see like the suffering or what is actually happening inside your brain. And that I think that's why it gets so easy to get stuck on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same with social anxiety disorder or OCD or other anxiety based conditions,
Yeah.
because the process is happening internally. It primarily happening internally. We feel like it's kind of more difficult to access, but it's also important to remember that like anxiety, all forms of anxiety are kind
Yeah.
of physical and mental. So, and we can often have this thing of saying, I wish I had, you know, um, heart palpitations rather than DPDR or something. And I certainly wish that I wished I had just developed agoraphobia or something. And I always thought, with those other conditions, they'd be easier to treat, or I could get around those. But they're all essentially the same. I mean, and anxiety is a holistic experience. Anxiety is, but anxiety is an evolutionary response to basically being chased by a wild animal. So it is both physical and mental. And the techniques that we use to train ourselves away from focusing on to let it go work with both the physical and mental aspects of it. It is it's I think for a long time it's been more difficult to kind of put a label on DPDR because people are often a lot less likely to describe it because they're worried about
Yeah.
sounding quote unquote crazy. But the more that we talk about it and the more that doctors are aware of it and the more that it's on social media and TikTok and YouTube and all the rest of it, it normalizes it. So when a kid is, yeah, as you were 18 years old, or as I was when I was 25, this thing happens, it hits you like a train, but then you find an explanation and you just go, okay, that's what that is. This is just another anxiety based condition and I can recover. And it just eases that process and makes it easier to get out of, more swift to get. It speeds up the recovery process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christiana, I got one more question for you.
Yep.
There's going to be people watching this interview who may be going through a very, very similar situation to what you went through, maybe back when you were 18, or maybe back during the when the second bout hit you. What advice would you have for anybody watching this interview?
Okay. I wish I could go back and tell myself these things. But number one is your DPDR experience. It's not unique. It might feel like you have some kind of rare, serious form of it. It's not. It's all rooted the same. You recover in the same way. And also just go live your life. Like it's anxiety. It's not that important. It's not important enough to stop you from doing things that you enjoy. And even if in the moment you feel like you can't enjoy them, go do them anyway because you have to tell your brain that the anxiety is not important and it's not a big deal. And yeah, I remember I went to the Taylor Swift Eras tour like in full on DPDR and I had mapped out my exit route. I didn't even want to go and I probably wouldn't have gone had I not already spent like a ton of money and invited a friend who really wanted to go. Um, but I'm so glad that I did it. It was uncomfortable the whole time. I couldn't wait to leave. But I took lots of videos, lots of pictures, and I still like look back on them. And I'm so glad that I went because it, DPDR, it's don't let it take over your life. Do things even if they're uncomfortable, and eventually they won't feel uncomfortable anymore.
Nice. Nice. Taylor Swift fixes everything, you know?
I know. I just, I remember what play, like, this doesn't feel real. I don't feel real, but if this isn't real, hey, this is a pretty cool place to not to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh my God. Oh my God. I actually would have loved to have gone to see it. Yeah, there's folks I know who went to see it like 2 or 3 times when it was in Dublin. I said it was like literally the best thing they've ever seen. Yeah, yeah. I'm I would definitely go if I get a chance in the future. Christiana, it's been so lovely to speak with you. I really, really enjoyed this, and thank you for taking the time to share your experience and being so candid about all the ups and downs of it. I know people watching this will find it extremely helpful and inspirational. So, thank you again so much, and enjoy life post recovery, and keep up the good work. Okay,
thank you.
take care. Bye bye.
Bye.